The drill field was alive before the sun had fully risen, the air sharp with cold and tension, the kind that seeped into bones and stayed there. Boots slammed against gravel in perfect rhythm, a sound so precise it felt mechanical, as if the recruits themselves had become part of the base infrastructure. Rows of bodies stood locked in formation, backs straight, chins lifted, eyes fixed forward. Among them was a female recruit, smaller than many around her but rigid with determination, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Sweat ran down her temples despite the chill, soaking into the collar of her uniform. She had been awake since before dawn, running, lifting, pushing past pain she hadn't known her body could endure. She told herself the same thing she had every day since arriving: don't break, no matter what. The instructor stalked the line like a storm looking for a place to strike. His boots moved slower than the recruits, deliberate, heavy, each step meant to be heard. His voice cut through the air without warning, sharp and violent, tearing into one recruit after another. He insulted their families, their intelligence, their worth, using humiliation as a weapon, justifying it as training. Most of them absorbed it silently. They had been taught that reacting was failure. When he stopped in front of the female recruit, something in his expression shifted. His eyes lingered too long. His mouth twisted into a grin that wasn't professional, it was personal. He leaned close, invading her space, screaming inches from her face. She could smell coffee and anger on his breath. He mocked her posture, her strength, her right to even stand there. His words were louder now, sharper, designed not just to test but to wound. She kept her gaze forward, heart hammering against her ribs, every muscle screaming to tense, to defend, to do something. But she didn't. She knew the rules. She knew the cost of reacting. Silence was her shield. Without warning, his hand slammed into her shoulder. It wasn't corrective. It wasn't instructional. It was force. Her boot slid slightly on the gravel as she fought to keep balance, the impact sending a shock of pain through her arm. A few recruits nearby flinched before catching themselves. No one spoke. The line held, but the air felt thinner, heavier. The instructor laughed, a short, ugly sound, emboldened by the control he believed he had. He shouted louder, calling her weak, calling her a mistake, questioning why she was allowed anywhere near a uniform like that. Then he struck her helmet with the flat of his hand. The crack echoed across the field, loud enough to turn heads. Her vision blurred for a split second as her head snapped to the side, pain flaring along her neck. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to slow. The cadence of breathing, the distant hum of generators, even the instructor's voice faded into a dull roar. She tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. Still, she faced forward again, forcing her body back into alignment, refusing to give him what he wanted. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't disciplined silence, it was shocked. Even the instructor seemed to feel it, though he masked it quickly. He stepped closer, gripping the front of her vest, tugging her half a step forward as he screamed that she'd never survive real combat, that she'd be a liability, that people like her got others killed. His fingers dug into the fabric hard enough to hurt. Her hands shook at her sides, not from fear alone, but from restraint. Every instinct screamed to react, to defend herself, to push back. But she stayed still, eyes burning, breath shallow and controlled. What he didn't see were the eyes beyond the field. What he didn't know was that this morning wasn't like the others. A scheduled inspection had brought high-ranking officers onto the base, men who had spent lifetimes in real combat, men who understood the difference between breaking someone down to build them stronger and breaking them because you could. From a distance, they had watched. They had heard the tone change. They had seen the shove, the strike, the grip. And in that moment, as the female recruit stood trembling but unbroken, something irreversible had already begun. The female recruit was ordered back into formation as if nothing had happened, the instructor's grip releasing her vest with a final, contemptuous shove. The line snapped tight again, boots aligned, shoulders squared, but the damage was already done. Pain pulsed through her neck and shoulder in steady waves, each breath a careful calculation to keep her composure intact. She focused on the horizon, a dull blur beyond the parade ground, using it as an anchor while her heartbeat slowly settled. Around her, the other recruits stood frozen, eyes forward, yet she could feel their awareness like static in the air. They had seen it, all of them, and none of them would forget. The instructor resumed his pacing, but something about him had changed. His movements were sharper now, more aggressive, as if he needed to reassert control over the field. He shouted commands with exaggerated force, punishing the entire platoon with drills, barking orders that sent them dropping to the ground, then yanking them back to their feet. Push-ups on gravel tore at palms. Burpees burned lungs raw. Every time the female recruit's shoulder screamed in protest, she swallowed it down, refusing to be singled out again. Sweat blurred her vision, dripping from her chin into the dirt, but she kept moving, counting silently, one repetition at a time. Time stretched painfully. Minutes felt like hours. The instructor seemed determined to grind them all into the ground, his voice hoarse yet relentless. Still, beneath the fury, there was a flicker of something else, unease. He kept glancing toward the far end of the field, toward the administrative buildings beyond the training area. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. He didn't know why, only that something felt off. The base was too quiet in places it shouldn't have been. The female recruit noticed it too. During a brief pause, as they stood panting in formation, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Dark vehicles rolling slowly along the edge of the compound. No sirens, no urgency, just controlled, deliberate motion. Her stomach tightened. High-ranking visitors, maybe. Inspections weren't unheard of, but they rarely came this close to live training. She didn't dare turn her head, but a fragile thread of hope sparked inside her, dangerous, unwelcome, but impossible to ignore. The instructor shouted again, ordering the platoon to attention. His voice cracked mid-command, betraying his frustration. That was when it happened. The sound of approaching boots, measured, confident, cut through the field. Not the frantic stomp of recruits, but the steady rhythm of people who didn't need to prove anything. The instructor froze for half a second before recovering, spinning toward the sound with forced authority etched across his face. 4 figures stepped onto the field, their presence instantly altering the atmosphere. They didn't shout. They didn't rush. Their uniforms were immaculate, their posture relaxed but unmistakably powerful. Rank insignia caught the morning light. Navy SEAL colonels. The kind of men whose names carried weight long before they ever entered a room. Conversation across the base seemed to die in that instant, as if the entire facility had collectively held its breath. "Carry on," one of them said calmly, his voice low but commanding. The instructor snapped to attention so fast it was almost comical, sweat streaking his face as he saluted. His earlier bravado evaporated, replaced by rigid obedience. The colonels observed silently for a moment, their eyes scanning the platoon, taking in scraped hands, shaking limbs, and finally settling on the female recruit. One of them narrowed his eyes slightly, noticing the way she favored her shoulder, the faint smear of blood at the corner of her mouth. "Recruit," another colonel said, stepping forward just enough to break protocol. "Are you injured?" The question hit like a shockwave. No recruit was ever asked that during training, especially not by someone of his rank. The instructor stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening. Every rule screamed at her to stay silent, to deny weakness, to protect the chain of command. Her throat burned as she swallowed. She glanced straight ahead, then spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Yes, sir." The word echoed louder than any shouted command. The field went completely silent. One of the colonels nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. He turned his gaze to the instructor, and the air seemed to thicken around them. No accusations yet, no raised voices, just a look that carried the weight of years of warfare and leadership. "Step away from the formation," the colonel said quietly, to the instructor. In that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't an inspection anymore. This was an end. The instructor hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for everyone to notice. It was the first time anyone had ever seen him pause on a command. Then training kicked in, and he stepped away from the formation, boots clicking sharply as he moved, face rigid, eyes fixed forward. The colonels didn't rush him. They didn't need to. Control radiated from them effortlessly, the kind earned over decades rather than enforced through fear. One of them signaled to a nearby medic, who approached the female recruit with quiet urgency, placing a steady hand near her elbow. "Easy," the medic murmured, guiding her gently out of the line. The simple human touch nearly broke her composure. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together until that moment. As she was wrapped in a jacket and led a few steps away, she glanced back once at the platoon. Dozens of eyes stared straight ahead, but she could feel their silent support, their shared understanding that something important was happening, not just for her, but for all of them. The colonels formed a loose semicircle around the instructor. Their voices were low, controlled, but every word carried across the field. They asked him to explain his actions. He started confidently, falling back on rehearsed phrases about discipline, stress inoculation, and preparing recruits for combat. He spoke quickly, too quickly, trying to stay ahead of the questions. But the questions kept coming, precise and surgical. Why physical contact was made? Why the contact escalated? Why one recruit was targeted repeatedly? Why medical attention was not requested after visible injury? With each answer, his voice lost strength. His posture, once so imposing, began to sag under scrutiny. One colonel produced a tablet, tapping the screen before holding it up just long enough for the instructor to see. Footage, multiple angles, the shove, the strike, the grip on the vest. Recorded clearly, without interpretation, without mercy. The instructor's mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing left to say. Behind them, the platoon remained at attention, watching without moving. The female recruit sat on the edge of a vehicle, medic checking her neck and shoulder, cleaning the blood from her lip. Pain still throbbed, but something else had taken its place, a strange, unfamiliar sense of relief. She wasn't being ignored. She wasn't being told to endure in silence. She was being seen. The colonel stepped away briefly, conferring in low tones. The base commander had arrived now, standing just outside the circle, his expression grim. Paperwork moved fast after that. Orders were given. Phones were pulled out. Names were spoken that carried consequences far beyond the training field. When the colonels returned, their decision was already made. The instructor was informed he was being relieved of duty effective immediately. His training authority was suspended pending full investigation. His access credentials would be revoked. He was to be escorted off the field and off the base. There was no shouting, no humiliation, just finality. Two military police officers appeared as if summoned by the words themselves, standing quietly at his sides. For the first time since the morning began, the instructor's eyes flicked toward the female recruit. Not with anger this time, but with something closer to disbelief. In minutes, everything he thought he controlled, his reputation, his power, his future, had collapsed. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. He turned and walked away, escorted by officers, his boots sounding strangely hollow against the pavement. One of the colonels turned back to the platoon. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice calm but resonant. "Training is meant to make you stronger. It is not an excuse for abuse. Anyone who forgets that does not belong in a position of leadership." He paused, letting the words settle. "You did the right thing by holding the line." Then he looked at the female recruit. "You showed discipline under pressure," he said simply. "That matters." She nodded, emotion tightening her chest, unsure if she trusted herself to speak. The medic helped her stand, and as she did, something shifted inside her. The pain would heal, the bruise would fade, but this moment, the knowledge that strength could exist alongside accountability, would stay with her forever. As the colonels left the field, the routine of the base slowly resumed, but nothing felt the same. Among the recruits, a quiet understanding spread. Power had limits, leadership had responsibility, and even in the most unforgiving environments, there were lines that could not be crossed without consequence.